Thanks for coming, everyone, to this monthly meeting of the Doñana County Historical Society. This is the last meeting that we will be doing for a couple of months. We usually take the summer off, and we will be back in September with our next virtual meeting. We're still trying to determine if we're going to be able to do any sort of in-person, face-to-face, I should say, meetings in the fall. The jury is still out on that. We hope to get back to that sometime soon. In the meantime, the Zoom platform has been working well for us, and it allows us to do things like get people like Dr. Nelson from a distance to come present to us. All right, well, we don't want to keep people waiting. We got a little bit of a late start. My apologies for that. I was helping my daughter with some homework and time got away from me. But I think we will go ahead and get started. Again, welcome to this monthly meeting of the Doñana County Historical Society. We're glad to have you all here. I know that there are always a lot of members of the society that come to the meetings, but we also get a lot of non-members at the meetings. If you're not a member of the society, we would love to have you become a part of the organization. It's a great group, a lot of good people. And we do these monthly meetings. We publish an annual journal, the Southern New Mexico Historical Review. We do field trips out to historic sites. And in July of this year, I work at the New Mexico State University Library Archives and Special Collections. And we're going to have a day just for members of the Doñana County Historical Society to come into the archives on a Saturday and spend a few hours there. So if you're interested in that, let us know. We'd love to have you come out for that. Without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to our Vice President, Garland Courts, and he's going to introduce our speaker for tonight. Garland?
Great, thanks. Let me give you a little background on Dr. Nelson. He was born in Los Angeles, California, actually the city of Compton, I believe, not too far from my stomping grounds in Long Beach, so I know where you're from there. He went to Santa Monica Community College, and then he went over to New Mexico, and he attended New Mexico State University, where he got a degree in history. Then he went to University of Northern Iowa, where he received his master's degree in Black history, and also at the same time received a commission as an Army officer. And from there, he went to UTEP and got his PhD. And while he was at UTEP, he wrote a 200-page dissertation on the rise and fall of Blackdom. The perfect person to talk about Blackdom. So we're excited to have you, Dr. Nelson. And if anybody has a question while Dr. Nelson's speaking, you can put it in the chat, and I'll make sure that he gets it. I'll read it to him. So, Dr. Nelson, it's all yours.
This is such an intimate crowd.
Yeah, we're good.
So today I want to do something a little bit more interactive. So when you have a question, go ahead and wave. So is it possible for us to see waves? I just want to see if I can see the wave. If so, I'll go in a little bit deeper into the material. So if someone or a few of you can click on the wave button. Okay, there's a hand. Okay, Elaine, okay, all right, great. So if I could see that raised hand, I'll go in a little bit deeper on the material. This may take a little bit longer than usual, but it's a great Thursday. So I am now coming from an intersection of mostly Santa Clara Pueblo area in Espanola. It's reminding me of a new era, even though this is a place of grand history. Cowboy culture is coming to the fore when you're talking about Black cowboys today. There are movies and shows and series on Netflix like Concrete Cowboy. And so we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that history. So I want to show you this first. I first went to Compton College. Okay, and this is as soon as you leave Compton College, city of Compton right there at the bottom here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Okay, so it's city of Compton. And this picture comes up. Okay, it says, don't ride your horse on the lawn. This is Compton. This is urban. This is inner city. These are Black folks. on horses, and they don't want you to ride the horses on the lawn. So we're going to start today thinking into, hold on one moment. Let me make sure I have this one up. Okay. All right. So why now is Black cowboy culture rising to the forefront of American popular culture? Again, the Afro-frontier thesis suggests intersectional Blackness emerges in the moments of chaos, particularly during times of epic displays of Americanized violence. I want to show you this. Compton, 1920, Main Street. When in season, they ride as the tip of the spear. Today, we shine light on the section of Black folks who intentionally segregated themselves in order to deliver on their ancestral striving beyond freedom and into sovereignty. And a little bit closer so you can see it. Okay, this is in the summer of 2020. It began with racial violence similar to the assaults perpetuated during the summer of 1919, a period often referred to as Red Summer. Black people on horseback, born and raised in Compton, was a vivid show of anti-racist force. June 9th, 2020, Black cowboys and cowgirls from Compton graced the pages of the New York Times under the headline, evoking history, Black cowboys take to the streets. For people who grew up in Hub City, it was more of our reality. Leaving the Afro frontier to occupy space in places like Southern California, Oakland, and Harlem to engage America's roaring 20s, Black cowboys continued to maintain a vibrant culture amongst themselves. A historical narrative sickness has concealed a brief period at the turn of the 20th century when Black people realized their ancestral strivings. Wow. And awesome. And so you end up, let's say if you go to Liberia, I'm going to zoom in a little bit, 1821, you end up with that same triad of ministers, military men, and Freemasons. So you fast forward into the US West and Mexico's northern frontier, you end up with Buffalo soldiers, military men, Freemasons, and ministers. And that becomes the source for Black colonization. Okay. So Blackdom was a real place located in the southeastern section of the New Mexico territory. The Afro-frontier town was part of a Black colonization movement that operated on a continuum influenced by ministers, military men, and Black Freemasons. After the Plessy decision in 1896 established the separate but equal doctrine, Black institutions evolved to take advantage by encouraging a separate and equal response. Blackdom was a real place that started with an inherited idea. The Afro-frontier town manifested at the turn of the 20th century for African descendants under the conditions of American Blackness. And Blackdom was on Mescalero Apache land. Okay. All of Chavez County was, Roswell, and I believe Artesia as well. The idea for Blackdom developed throughout the 19th century. In the 20th century, although Blackdom existed as a town for a brief moment, self-determination and how to achieve it were exemplified in the experiment. Significant to the Black and ambitious, Blackdom townsite was a proof of concept for how to deliver on the promise of God's sovereignty. And we love census records, right? So here, and I can zoom out a little bit so you can see Chavez County, Bernalillo here. And the arrow tells us where the Negroes were. And so you can see it's less than 200 in Chavez County when Blackdom began, okay, 1900. In 1900, Black people totaled less than 200 in Chavez County, and most of them were represented at the beginning of the colonization scheme. From the state of Washington to South Carolina, Blackdomites advertised the organization of Afrotopia. And we won't read it, but I'll let you see it I'll spend, maybe 15 seconds here so you can see what the ad looks like. And this went all throughout the United States. There were over 100 different ads from coast to coast. And they talked about $10,000 worth of stock and that the town would be called Blackdom. On September 9th, 1903, the Santa Fe New Mexican reported the incorporation of the Blackdom Townsite Company and its articles of incorporation with the names of 13 men and their intentions. And you can see here the 13 men here. Isaac Jones, Blackdom Townsite Company's first vice president, began his homestead in April of 1903. In 1905, Isaac Jones became the first Blackdomite co-founder to complete a homestead. The basic process took 3 to 10 years. And this is a question that I want you to refer back to when we talk about the early years, if the question comes up, how it developed. And here's the question on number 8 on the homestead records. Is your present claim within the limits of an incorporated town, yada, yada, yada? No, sir. And this is the vice president of the Blackdom Townsite Company. So that's how I end up calling this early period the lost years, because it was kind of lost to the struggle and in ambiguity. In 1909, after minimal participation in the colonization scheme, Blackdom was revived as a way to mitigate the impact of New Mexico's impending statehood and the shift from federal to local power, which is a big deal. Blackdomites elite owned land, but owning land wasn't enough to realize their Afrotopic dreams. Located 20 miles south of Roswell, Blackdom was a small enclave of land-owning people. Blackdomites needed a collective action to deliver on the promise of their intersection. During Blackdom's revival after 1909, Blackdom included the significant striving of Black women. As they began participating in the homestead process more fully, Maddie Moore, Pernisha Russell, and Ella Boyer were a few of those who chose to engage as part of Blackdom's homestead class. Blackdom's growth intensified with passage of the Homestead Enlargement Act of 1909. The township increased enough that Blackdomites organized a school and reached out to the territorial government for curriculum. This is the Homestead Act, New Mexico there, and from half square mile to a whole square mile was the change for desert lands. Revival included educating the next generation by also projecting an intersectional Blackness from behind the Du Boisian veil of their municipality. For 2 years, Harold Coleman, a newspaper adsman from back east, led the advertising campaign published in the Crisis magazine. Separate and equal, Blackdomites projected intentional Blackness and God's sovereignty. After a few privileged Black travelers reported back to the migrating, ambitious Black masses, Blackdom became a beacon for the illuminated. The revival, Blackdom became a real place and more than a refuge. Blackdomites preferred farmers to city folk for the sake of increased production. Everyone was required to adjust to the steep learning curve of dry farming on desert prairies. A lot of prayers, a lot of faith. The agricultural society was a community set on living by God's divine law of sowing and reaping. Seed time and harvest time were different on desert prairies, but the ambitious frontier scheme was refined into a process with predictable outcomes for investors. Now, I want you to note this is an ad 1912 through 1915 that went out in different Black magazines, and particularly in the Crisis magazine. And you see here, they made sure, hey, farmers preferred, wanted. In 1914, as a signee for Maddie and Pernicia, Frank Boyer completed the land patent for Blackdom's 40-acre town square. On August 11, 1916, the Rio Grande Republic reported, Doña Ana County, Las Cruces, New Mexico, August 11th, 1916. George Malone was admitted to the New Mexico bar and identified as the first Negro to do so. I don't know if you can see that. It gets a little blurry when I zoom into that, but that's what it says for, let me see, about right there, you can see it. Okay. Blackdom's revival backdrop included the Mexican Revolution, raging in the borderlands as the U.S. entered into World War. Pushed to the forefront, Black children were conscripted into military service. Black people under the conditions of American Blackness, patriotic to a separate but equal system, Blackdomites put the future of the small village on hold and shifted their activities 20 miles north. In Roswell, Mittie Moore went from famous and hyper-visible to infamous. A patriotism fueled the war effort. The new era became a rationalization for raids on her bawdy business on 201 South Virginia Ave. During the shift to Roswell, the image of Black people was under assault across the world with D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. Black bodies were under the constant threat in the second wave of the Ku Klux Klan. The Roswell Daily Record, Roswellian leaders advertised the showing of Birth of a Nation and offered lectures on Americanism, which was grooming before incorporation of a Klan chapter in the city. Mittie Moore Wilson became the antithesis of the new patriotic fervor of the citizen soldier. She occupied the Black female public image in the region. Meanwhile, July 21st, 1917, the Roswell Daily Record reported Ezel Ragsdale had been drafted from the unincorporated Afro-frontier town, and the family prepared him for deployment, which included putting his homestead process on hold and moving the family to Roswell. The Women of Blackdom. The Women of Blackdom did their part on a few fronts. One of their major tasks was to diversify the Black female image in Chavez County. The Women of Blackdom hosted a few inter-ethnic bandage knitting parties for troops on the front lines. Curiously, the Women of Blackdom staged the intersectional gathering in the window on Main Street. Nevertheless, in the fall of 1917, Thursday, November 1st, in the fall 1917, Mittie led the headlines on trial for attempted murder of her fiance. Put 2 holes in his coat. John Wilson aggravated her enough that she pulled her revolver out and shot 2 holes in his coat, missing him completely. The police thought they had her, but she got off. Guilt not proven. Meady was on the margins of Blackdom society, and Blackdom women were in her periphery. Meady stayed unaffiliated prior to 1919, even though she began a homestead in 1915, 3 miles south of Blackdom Town Square. She needed a witness to vouch for her homestead progress under the threat of federal perjury charges, and the new Blackdom leadership legitimized her claim. And new leadership meaning the second, or in some cases third generation Blackdomite. In the spring of 1922, Mitty completed her final homestead proof for a whole square mile. And by the summer, Blackdom sold their church, and the town faithful migrated outward. Ella and half the Boyer family moved to Vado in Doña Ana County. Although there was an exodus from Blackdom after 1919, the town business was stronger than ever. This is the twist. This is the new history that few have ever heard. The next generation took over as America entered the roaring 20s in post-war euphoria and after a pandemic. December 1931, 1919, extra, extra, read all about it. Will pull acreage. Blackdomites incorporated Blackdom Oil and set the Agricultural Society on a path towards oil exploration. And I will stop it there. That is the newer narrative that takes the old narrative of Blackdom that ended in failure, basically because of drought and because the Black people did not adjust to the environment. Instead, the story that I speak of, and I use Afrofronterism to kind of ring a different bell than exodusterism, is that it was successful because even though Blackdom ended shortly after the Great Depression began in the 1930s, Frank Boyer, in his last interview in 1947, 2 years before his passing, he told us that Blackdom Oil was still producing oil royalties, which makes it have flow into the World War II era, which means even if you forget that, even though Blackdom was a short period, there was a larger context for what it meant and what it produced. So I'll end it there. I'm ready for the questions. Okay.
Any questions out there? There we go. John Hawley has a question. I see.
Yeah, I guess I'm maybe the only living founding member of the Doña Ana County Society. I live up in Albuquerque now, but we had a fond memory, and I noticed there's at least one member of the Boyer family here, and we'll wonder how they're related to Thelma Boyer. When we were a young couple in Las Cruces, I was with the Aggies, New Mexico State. We had a young daughter, Glennis, who in the mid 60s, who was about 3 or 4 years old, was in the preschool program for faculty and students at New Mexico State University. And Thelma Boyer was a teacher there, or one of the staff of that school. And so we remember her fondly. And Las Cruces was an interesting town. I was with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And until the Civil Rights Act of 1966, when I had visitors to our research project of soil and water conservation from African countries.
Wow.
There was no place that they could stay
Wow.
except in a tourist home in Las Cruces or at a motel in Bado.
Yes.
And many of you have seen the book that everybody had. There was a movie made about it that told people, Black travelers across the
The
South.
Green Book? The Green Book?
Green Book,
Yes,
where they could
yes,
stay.
yes.
And I had them as a federal employee. I had really high-ranking officials one time from Tanganyika, yet they could not stay in the Mission Motel, any of the motels in Las Cruces until 1966.
Wow.
And so Jim Crow was alive and well, as you well know.
Yes, yes.
But I would like to hear more about Thelma Boyer, from if any of her relatives know her. She would have been a granddaughter, I think, of the founding Boyer family, Frank Boyer.
So can we open up the floor to I see it as Marie Boyer? Is that
Marie
who?
Boyer is here.
Okay. Can we open up the floor so we can hear from her somehow? Let me see. There we go.
Okay, Thelma is a cousin. My dad's brother, my dad was Hobart, Francis' son.
Okay,
So Roosevelt is his brother, and Thelma was his daughter.
okay.
So we all went to Mexico State University.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna see.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Any other questions? I'm here. I'm just looking to see if I have the family photo available here.
You see, we have a question from Elaine
Okay.
McKinney.
What's the question?
I'm just wondering, is the oil still producing? And if so, who are the beneficiaries?
No. It's the oil claims. I have only been able to track the depth of it to 1947 and looking at Boyer. The rest of what I have are just pieces, and it requires kind of some, grant or something for me to develop that part of the trajectory of it. But by the 1970s, I mean, there are many things that happened in between there, but by the 1970s, a lot of the land, was sold for like $5 for this reason or that, taxes. Some people die and don't know that their relatives own the land. So it ends up in a, or the Chavez County Land Trust or something to that effect. I think that's how Roswell Correctional Facility, it's actually on Blackdom land. And some of the, so some of the families, I think the Gates and the Heron families are the ones who owned that particular set of homesteads that the correctional facilities on. But as far as who were the beneficiaries, that would require a study specific to that.
Yeah, a land study probably, and maybe
Yes.
through an oil company, often those fractional shares
See,
are
that's see, that's what I
brought
was getting
together
at.
in the oil company records. So you may be able to do something there too, depending on what oil company has rights there and is doing the pumping, if there is any.
By 1947, Gulf Oil was there. So, Gulf Oil is still alive, but I don't know if it's the same Gulf Oil there, because, the shadiness of the oil industry kind of, continued for a while.
That research is not easy.
Yeah, it's a lot of shell companies here and there. In fact, if you go to that 1947 article in the Las Cruces Sun News, Boyer calls the Blackdom oil Lincoln oil, and that's because there was also a Lincoln oil, because it's a long story, but the short version is your land, and if you have a lot of it, you can be in different oil companies, because you can lease part of your land over here and you can lease your land over there. So it's just fractional again.
Thank you.
I want to comment. I'm a geologist, and when after I left New Mexico State, I went to work for the State Bureau of Geology mines up in Socorro, and I had a colleague who took me out to in 1975 to Blackdom, and it was like death warmed over when I got there. It's
hasn't
not
changed.
And the big thing you see, you showed a scene of the Pecos Valley, and all the center pivot sprinklers are out in the valley, and Blackdom is up on a terrace. In fact, it's called the Blackdom Terrace.
Yeah.
And it is, water is the big thing. That's my specialty.
Yes.
And there ain't no water.
Yes.
It's it's brackish.
Yes.
You can walk on that water.
What's fascinating is that they were able to pivot so quickly, because the drought, the super drought that everyone talks about in 1916 that supposedly ended Blackdom, it didn't. And I see two hands up, and I want to make sure that I get to Shameen. I can see it. I think I can see it. Okay. Well, let's just get to your question first, and then I'll get to what I was going to say. I think it's Shameen. Did I say that correctly?
Hi, yes, it's Shemin or Shemaine.
Shemaine. Okay.
Hi, Dr. Nelson.
Hi.
Thank you for your presentation. I came across your work a little later. I actually was introduced to Blackdom via Dr. Maya Allen. She did a presentation for Holden. I'm a stationery designer, actually, and I was working on a collection that I wanted to use to pay homage to the African American experience and our connection to the land. And it's just been incredible to just learn so much via just Blackdom itself, and then overall Afrofronterism and Afrotopia, et cetera. So thank you for your contributions to this work. Very much. To get to my question, I wanted to ask, have there been any strides to revive this place? And if not, or in general, particularly for my generation, what can Afrofronterism look like today?
What generation? Let me just make sure.
I'm 30.
I can't really tell.
I just turned 30.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. That's a long conversation. I'm gonna give you a short version,
Yes,
which
sir.
is I talk about the Afro frontier, and right now we're in the middle of the digital frontier. So the way that it is transforming right now is, for example, the Boyer family. I have over 100 Boyer members of the Boyer family in a group on Blackdom Townsite Company on Facebook, and they engage. And then there's the Klepper side of the Boyer family. They are also in a group that I'm also in the middle of. So virtually the town is starting to exist again in the descendants wanting to know more. And so as they engage and share some of the work, they also are engaging themselves. There's a young rapper, Rob Cheerio. He's a direct descendant of Frank Boyer. And I talk to him often. And if you look on Instagram, he has this hashtag Boyer Nation, because all of the younger kids, they use the hashtags, right? So if you look through my digital footprint on that has to do with the Blackdom thesis, significance of the Afrofrontier, Afrofronterism, it's basically an Afrofuturism. So an Afrofrontierism to Afrofuturism that allowed history to be less of a rise and fall and more of a continuum. So I can talk about 100 years ago and it still refer to right now. Like we're talking about Black cowboys, concrete cowboy. Well, where did those cowboys in the city come from? They came from Blackdom. In fact, if you go to Compton, where I'm from, you'll find Boyers working and teaching in the Compton Unified School District. So Rob Cheerios in Long Beach, and then you have the Boyers in Compton and Long Beach together. Now, we in trouble. That's Snoop Dogg. And, that's my generation, but,
Thank you.
Thank think Elaine had another question. Elaine?
I think her hand is just up.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Someone wanted to know
Wilma.
about,
Wilma. Oh,
There we go. Yeah, Wilma, please.
Yes, is there anything left of it? Any buildings or foundations or any evidence that it existed other than all of your work, which I appreciate very much?
Okay, so if you go to Blackdom, it is still death warmed over, like Mr. Hawley described. It is a space where you need an imagination. But I want you to understand, 100 years ago, they had an imagination as well. They understood in 1903 that New Mexico was a territory, not a state, which meant that Jim Crow laws didn't apply soon as you pass the Pecos River. So imagine, they didn't want anything there to be burned down. As soon as they struck oil, they decided to sell their church. So people think that the town was abandoned. They wanted people to think that it was abandoned so that they can continue getting oil royalties well into World War II era without being, messed with by the rise of Jim Crow and and Jane Crow in the 1940s and 50s and 60s. And so they were able to still, and that money actually, the royalties from oil supported Boyer's time in Vado, where the family still meets every 2 years in Vado. That's where the family reunion is. And if you're in Doña Ana County, you have to go to Boyer's tomb at the Vado Riverview Cemetery. If you can't, you can go on Instagram and see that I have created a hashtag called Boyer's Tomb, and it speaks to what's there and its importance. So yeah, so there's quote nothing there, but the documents, the mundanity of the documents show how brilliant they were, because they were able to produce on land that was really hard to produce on. They were able to create generational wealth from sand, silt, and a lot of dirt, a lot of wind, no water. I mean, yeah, you can walk on the water, which,
So,
by the way, they were biblical people. So
tell me again where that tomb is.
Vado Riverview Cemetery. And
Okay.
if you look at the Vado Riverview Cemetery, it actually looks like a map of Blackdom. And their tomb is kind of like the 40 acres of Blackdom. And then you see the larger, I have to show people this one day. But let me see if I can get to it quickly. Let's see. No, that would take me too long. I don't want to take us down the rabbit hole, but I have a whole rabbit hole that has to do with how the cemetery is set up. If you look at it, it's Blackdom, but they're cemetery. And then Frank and Ella are in the same, garden style square space, and he was a Freemason, so we know that he looked through a lens that was beyond the physical. He always had a spiritual and mental reason to do the things that he did. Frank Boyer, me speaking of, that I'm speaking of.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Any other questions? There we go. Malia?
I have one, just, can you do one on Vado? That's all I have to say.
On another day? You mean on another day? Do you mean on another day?
History. Living.
Okay, yes, it is. It is. I won't do anything on Vado now. However, in Vado is where I begin to understand what Blackdom, the significance of it was. Because if you go there, and I've brought people there and I go, oh, there's nothing there. Well, they say the same thing about Blackdom, but then when you go into the small, I think it's Barino, the small little communities over there, and then the churches, in the back off of I-10, if you take Lou Henson Road, you begin to understand that they had developed the utopia that they always wanted. It's near the Rio Grande River. For the most part, they had water. So it was, yeah. I would do something on Vado a little bit later, but I have to put it in a larger context, because then we get to how Boyer saw his biblical understanding. Him not being Moses, like most people portray him. He saw himself more like a Joshua, which was on the edge of the promised land, and instead, went in as Joshua instead of like Moses, who died before he went into the promised land. So that provides a whole nother context when we talk about Vado. But yes, it is living history, and I can't wait to get to that chapter eventually. Most people are focused on the Blackdom part. So
I see. Malia, did you have a question, I believe?
Oh, I was just going to ask if I had thought I had read from somewhere that a number of the people in Blackdom came from Texas.
Yes. Okay. So
or just from all over?
Yes, they were from all over. However, the Black folks who were in Chavez County originally flowed over that Texas border and past the Pecos because there was no Jim Crow. So, like, for example, Isaac Jones, he was in New Mexico in 1900 and was on the census, and he lived in Roswell on Kentucky Street. Well, he was a cook. He wanted to be more than a cook. He had a young child, and so that's when, in April 1903, he began his homestead out where Blackdom began. And a few months later, Blackdom began in September, the signing of the Articles of Incorporation, and then he was off to the races and became the first to homestead in, quote, Blackdom, even though the paperwork didn't say it. But yeah, some Texans did come. Yeah. And they came by train, of course, right? To Dexter train station, Roswell train station. So
Thank you.
And Jim, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm sitting here in Lincoln, Nebraska. Just got here a few days ago. And as soon as I got here, I ran into an article about DeWitt, Nebraska. And it is a Black colony in Cherry County out in the northwest part of the state, 1907 to 1936, about the same time frame. And apparently several hundred, close to 400 colonizers at one point, and it slowly died away. And at one time, they controlled 40,000 acres up in Cherry County before they abandoned the place. I wonder if you knew anything about it.
Yes, to some degree. It falls under what I call the Afro frontier. I'll just say that it's a part of the continuum. There were over 200 incorporated Black towns, and then there were, in Texas alone, over 500 freedom colonies. My grandfather went in the military, because I talk about the military ministers and Freemasons. My grandfather went into the military in Korea, but he came from Lott, Texas, a town created by the railroads. So the railroads are kind of how these towns began, because they needed a post. Well, they had porters, and then immigration companies developed as a result. So DeWitt is a part of that legacy of Black colonization, and using the separate but equal to the advantage of Blackness instead of against.
Okay.
Okay, there is a question I see in chat, or maybe it's a statement here. Sandy Abernathy says, our son interviewed a Mr. Boyer when he was a student at NMSU around the late 1970s. He was very impressed with the gentleman.
Well, that's Mr. Boyer was supposed to be over 90 at the time. So I don't know which Mr. Boyer it was.
Roosevelt?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, in Vado, the Boyer family maintains
And I was really
a position like mayor or
Right.
honorary mayor in Vado. So their family still maintains their ties to Doña Ana County, and pretty heavily, because again, like I said, they have the family reunions every 2 years, or used to, but starting in the 1970s. So.
The interview was a little difficult because Mr. Boyer was very deaf.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
but George was really, really impressed with him.
Okay. Yeah, they're very. I think when Frank came here, the family started learning Spanish pretty quickly.
Any other questions? We're kind of running in over our hour a little bit, but we did get a late start.
Yeah, we can keep going.
I wanted to ask really quick about the Blackdom Hotel and Post Office. If you could speak to these at all?
The hotel, I would really love to look in closer. So I would say that when you say hotel, we'll say the town had extra rooms and beds and boarding. So what would happen is, let's say, not just travelers, let's say you were a new homestead family. Well, you would get a host family. So, for example, Crutcher Eubank brought the
Right.
Eubank family from Kentucky, and and the whole family, 10 kids at all,
Yes.
came and lived with the Boyer family. And for the first year and a half, 2 years before Crutcher got everything ready to be on his homestead, they apprenticed with the Boyer family. So is that a hotel? You know, it's
Gotcha.
I don't know.
Gotcha.
I haven't seen a picture of a hotel, but I do get the hosting thing
Gotcha.
when
Gotcha.
in the records. So that's the part that has to be kind of reconciled. And then again, it's, more research.
Gotcha. And the post office?
The post office. Betty Malone was
Yes,
the
the postmaster.
yes. And Malone, the Malone family, George Malone, I can let me show you this since we're here at what the post office meant. So when we think of George Malone, I told you he was the first okay, let me back up. He was the first Black lawyer. Let me see if I can get to it. Timeline. Here we go. All right. So, George Malone, husband of Betty Malone. Look at who the notary republic is on the 40 acres of Blackdom Townsite. So this right here is the official plat of Blackdom Townsite. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Frank Boyer and Ella Boyer. You see that there? His wife. And if you go to Boyer's tomb, you'll see on his tombstone, at the top is the Freemason sign, and on the bottom it said devoted husband. So this was a big deal in the way that they did that. Okay. So you can see the plat book, and we can get to the verbiage. Frank and Ella Boyer. And I can give all this, I can put this up at some point, but I just want you to notice that post office meant a lot, right?
Yeah.
George Malone, Notary Republic. So that's a Black man who signed off on what was going on. And then here, right here, May 18th, 1922. So that's almost,
That's a couple days ago.
Yeah, you get what I'm saying? I just wanted us to realize, 100 years ago. I just want you to recognize that Afrofuturism is at hand.
Oh my gosh.
Gives you chills a little bit. It should. It didn't.
Everything about this place gives me chills.
Right. So, so we talk about homesteaders, and Black homesteaders realize that they were Black cowboys, ranchers. And
wasn't Mr. Boyer? I'm sorry. Wasn't he a Buffalo soldier?
Yes, he was. He was a Buffalo soldier, and he helped plat Fort Huachuca in Arizona. In his youth, he helped plat Blackdom in his middle ages, and then he got older, and he helped plat Clovis, New Mexico, which is where they had the military installation, and a lot of Black folks still there. I can talk further about Clovis too, but that's just that eastern Eastern New Mexico black vibe that goes over there. So
Wow.
yeah, black cowboys and so that also that date though, that May 28th. So it was platted then, but guess what? They sold the church shortly after they platted the town. So what was that about? Was it a failure if they platted the town in 1922? No, they were hiding the fact that they were getting oil royalties from oil companies. So they couldn't have a 1924 burning of Black Wall Street, because what happened is the Blackdom children who inherited that filtered into Roswell, which didn't have lines between like the black side of town and that kind of thing. New Mexico didn't have that kind of concept. So they were able to exist as a virtual town doing their business in Roswell instead of having to always go to Blackdom. They went to Blackdom for the ceremonial, like Juneteenth, for example.
Wow. Wow. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any more questions? Well, I want to thank Dr. Nelson for spending some time with us. We all enjoyed your, it's a virtual hand clap there for you. It was a good presentation and some things that none of us had heard before. So we thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And make sure you sign up for the newsletter. I have some new articles that I'm writing. If you haven't read the El Palacio article, it's the 107th issue. And it's the first time it's been an article on Blackdom. And it's actually in the chat. You can all check out. Marissa is helping us out. Marissa will share the link in the chat to the El Palacio. And now she's sharing the website. Or you could just go to the website and it's also there. So thank you.
Dr. Nelson, thank you so much. That was fantastic. And thank you for all the research you've done on this topic. We appreciate it. And we know we're going to have you back now to talk about Vado.
Okay. And I'm going to, it's going to look like a slideshow because I love the pictures and you about to get me started. Because the Rio Grande River, when there's no water, and then when it finally does appear, it's like magic. It's a transformation of all of the region from, dank beige to this green and then the reds, and it's beautiful. So I'll leave it there.
That's great. I also want to thank all of the Boyer family that came tonight and attended the presentation. Thank you so much for coming out, and any other descendants of the pioneers out at Blackdom. So thank everybody for coming out tonight. All right. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good summer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Well, I'm just showing up for the night, I guess. Got to